The court records allege that Oberhansley stabbed Blanton to death, then cut out a portion of her brain, cooked it, and then ate it.
These psycho killers didn't just commit horrific crimes. They showed their chilling true selves when they faced their sentences. James Terry Colley Jr.'s cold reaction is a haunting reminder of just how far evil can go. Psycho killers reacting to sentences reveals disturbing courtroom moments you'll never forget. Let's begin. In the early morning hours of September 11, 2014, a quiet street in Jeffersonville, Indiana became the epicenter of a gruesome tragedy. Police officers arrived at Tammy Jo Blanton's home for what seemed like a routine welfare check, but nothing could prepare them for what they found inside. A beloved member of the community had been savagely murdered, and the true horror? Her killer was still in the house. Tammy Jo Blanton was doing everything right to reclaim her life. After ending a toxic relationship with Joseph Oberhansley, she was taking steps to protect herself. She changed the locks, confided in friends about her concerns, and worked to move forward. But Oberhansley wouldn't let go. His behavior grew more erratic in the days leading up to the crime, and Tammy made it clear she wanted no contact with him. When Tammy didn't show up for work that morning, her co-workers immediately knew something was wrong. Tammy was dependable. This was unlike her. A welfare check was called in, and as officers approached her home, they noticed signs of forced entry. Inside, the scene was beyond anything they could have imagined. Tammy had been attacked with a level of violence that left experienced investigators shaken, but the discovery didn't stop there. Oberhansley, still at the house, carried a bloodied folding knife in his back pocket, a haunting clue to the night's events. As the investigation began, the horrific details came to light. Oberhansley had brutally assaulted Tammy, ending her life in a fit of rage. But what followed was even more disturbing. He mutilated her body and engaged in acts of cannibalism, defiling her remains in ways that shocked everyone involved. During his trial, the evidence against Oberhansley was overwhelming. Forensic analysis linked him directly to the crime, and the courtroom was filled with graphic details of what he had done. Oberhansley's erratic behavior continued as he tried to disrupt the proceedings, often yelling at the judge and refusing to cooperate. His demeanor throughout was devoid of remorse, cold and emotionless.
The court records allege that Oberhansley stabbed Blanton to death, then cut out a portion of her brain, cooked it, and then ate it. The court documents say that Oberhansley also admitted to cutting out her heart and eating it, and also cutting out her lung.
After hearing the harrowing details, the jury took little time to deliver a verdict: guilty on all charges. The judge sentenced Oberhansley to life in prison without the possibility of parole, ensuring he would never harm anyone again. For Tammy's loved ones, the sentence brought a measure of closure, but no punishment could erase the trauma it left behind. Inside the courtroom, Tammy's family and friends were overcome with emotion. They spoke of her bright personality, her kindness, and her unwavering strength. Tears flowed freely as the impact statements painted a vivid picture of the life that had been stolen. In complete contrast, Oberhansley remained unmoved. No remorse, no apologies, just a blank stare that sent chills through everyone present. It was as if he couldn't grasp the devastation he had caused. The horrors of Tammy Jo Blanton's murder shattered her community and left the courtroom in silence. But chillingly, it's not the only case where unchecked rage led to unspeakable tragedy. Our next story takes us to Florida, where Tyrone Johnson turned what seemed like a routine argument into a crime so horrific that it stunned everyone who heard it.
30 feet, 15 steps, hunting down a 10-year-old child. That's what premeditation is.
On a quiet Sunday in Tampa, Florida, a 911 call shattered the stillness of the neighborhood. What first seemed like a disturbance turned into a double murder investigation that left even seasoned officers shaken. Inside the apartment of Tyrone Johnson, a horrific scene unfolded. A mother and her 10-year-old son lost their lives in what Johnson claimed was an act of self-defense. But the truth told a much darker story. Tyrone Johnson and his girlfriend, Stephanie Willis, had been living together with her 10-year-old son, Ricky Jr. On the surface, their home seemed typical until the cracks beneath the surface became impossible to ignore. That evening, a small fight over a TV channel escalated into something much darker. Words turned into threats, and as emotions boiled over, Stephanie demanded Johnson leave the apartment. But instead of walking away, he grabbed a gun. What happened next was nothing short of horrifying. Stephanie tried to shield her son as Johnson began shooting, but she couldn't protect him from the rage unleashed that night. The shots rang out, and Ricky Jr., just a child, tried to run for safety, but Johnson followed him to his room and ended his life in cold blood. After the killings, Johnson himself called 911 in hysterics. His voice cracked as he confessed to the murders, claiming it was all in self-defense.
911, what is your emergency?
I just shot my girlfriend and her son for attacking me.
You just shot him?
Both of them.
But when police arrived, the scene painted a very different picture. Blood was everywhere, soaking the floors, splattered across the walls. Investigators counted multiple gunshot wounds on both victims, and the evidence made it clear. This wasn't self-defense. This was rage unleashed. At his trial, Johnson's defense team attempted to portray him as a man acting out of fear, but the prosecution dismantled his claims. Forensic evidence showed deliberate and calculated actions, while the sheer brutality of the killings left no doubt about Johnson's intent.
A hysterical Johnson told police he felt under attack by Stephanie and claimed the child ran into the bedroom.
The jury didn't need long to reach their verdict. Tyrone Johnson was found guilty of first-degree murder for both victims, and the court handed him the ultimate punishment: death. For Stephanie's family, the sentencing brought some semblance of justice, but their grief remained.
It's still not closure for me, nothing's going to bring Brian and Stephanie back, but it's what he deserves.
A mother and child were gone forever, and no punishment could fill the void left in their hearts. In the courtroom, Johnson sobbed and pleaded for mercy, his once calm demeanor completely shattered as the reality of his fate set in.
I am truly remorseful and deeply sorry.
His desperate apologies did little to move Stephanie's family, who sat silently, their pain etched into their faces. One family member later said that while they were relieved by the verdict, it wouldn't bring back their loved ones. The tears shed that day were for a mother and son whose lives were senselessly cut short. The contrast between the grieving family and Johnson's breakdown made the courtroom heavy with emotion. While justice had been served, the weight of the loss hung over everyone in attendance.
Suffice it to say that a precious child is dead. This murder was heinous, atrocious, and cruel.
The pain Tyrone Johnson left behind is a chilling reminder of how quickly anger can destroy lives. But Austin Ford's case takes a darker turn, a plot driven by greed that ended in cold-blooded murder. And his final reaction will leave you speechless.
Investigators are on the scene after a body was found at Yellow River Park. The details are very limited right now, but we know officers responded to a call of a deceased body this morning.
In the heart of Georgia, a serene park became the setting for a crime that shattered lives. Yellow River Park, usually a peaceful escape for families and friends, was now the scene of a horrifying discovery. The lifeless body of 18-year-old Tory Lang, an honor graduate with dreams of a bright future, lay abandoned in the wilderness. The investigation would soon expose a web of betrayal, deceit, and violence. At the center of it, her close friend. Tory Lang was a beacon of hope and kindness, loved by her community and family. But behind her radiant smile, a dangerous friendship loomed. Austin Ford, someone she had trusted deeply, was about to betray that trust in the most unimaginable way. On a warm evening in July 2021, Tory met Ford for what should have been just another casual meetup. But something sinister transpired. A single gunshot to her head ended her life, and her car was later found burned and abandoned in a remote nature preserve miles from the crime scene. Ford's actions after the murder added to the chilling nature of the crime. Rather than coming forward, he fled the scene, destroyed evidence, and attended Tory's funeral as if nothing had happened. His cold demeanor masked the truth, but detectives were closing in. Ford was arrested in April 2022, nearly a year after Tory's murder. He claimed she had taken her own life during an emotional moment and that he had panicked, but the evidence painted a far different picture. Blood evidence tied Ford directly to the crime, as did his suspicious actions, the burning of Tory's car, and his attempts to avoid suspicion. In court, witnesses recounted Ford's manipulative tendencies, revealing his betrayal of a friend who had offered him nothing but kindness. As the trial progressed, Ford's demeanor in court was unnerving. His stoic expression as the horrific details of the murder were laid bare stunned everyone in attendance. The jury couldn't ignore his lack of remorse or the overwhelming evidence against him. After 2 mistrials, the prosecution decided against pursuing the murder charge further. Instead, Ford was convicted of concealing Tory's death and theft by taking, receiving a sentence of 20 years, with 10 years to be served in prison. For many, justice felt incomplete, but the sentence at least ensured Ford faced some consequences for his actions. In the courtroom, Tory's family was visibly heartbroken. Her aunt and godmother, Tamara Lang, spoke with emotion, sharing how deeply Tory's death had affected their lives. They described her as a beacon of joy whose life was stolen by someone she trusted. Ford, however, sat motionless, showing no remorse even as his sentence was read. The lack of emotion on his face made it clear to everyone that guilt or regret was foreign to him. The pain Austin Ford inflicted on his victim and their family was haunting. But our next story takes us to Florida, where jealousy and rage escalated into a crime so shocking it rattled an entire community.
911, where's your emergency? I think he shot everybody. He has a handgun, he's shooting everybody.
In St. Augustine, Florida, a city known for its serene beauty and historic charm, an unthinkable act shattered the peace. On August 27, 2015, what began as a heated dispute escalated into a double murder that left a community reeling. James Terry Colley Jr., a man consumed by jealousy and anger, turned his rage into a horrifying crime that would devastate two families and send shockwaves through the courtroom. Amanda Colley had finally found the strength to end her toxic marriage to James Colley Jr. After years of escalating arguments, she filed for divorce in June 2015, hoping to create a safe environment for herself and their two young children. But James refused to let go. His obsession with Amanda intensified, and soon his controlling behavior spiraled into stalking and threats. Despite a restraining order, James continued to harass Amanda. He repeatedly violated the court order, showing up unannounced at her home, and even installing a tracking device on her car. Amanda was terrified but determined to rebuild her life. She sought refuge in the company of her close friends, particularly Lindsay Munn, who became her confidant and support system. The tension came to a head on August 27, 2015, when James showed up at Amanda's house armed with a handgun. He had been monitoring her movements, and his jealousy had reached a boiling point. Bursting into the home, James confronted Amanda and Lindsay. His anger exploded into violence. He shot both women multiple times in a chilling display of cold-blooded rage. Amanda's screams echoed through the neighborhood as she tried to shield herself, but James showed no mercy. As the chaos unfolded, Amanda's mother, who had been in the home, managed to flee with the children, narrowly escaping the carnage. When police arrived, the scene they discovered was harrowing. Two women, lifeless, victims of a brutal and senseless act of violence. James fled the scene but was apprehended hours later. His capture marked the beginning of a legal battle that would expose the full extent of his dangerous obsession. During the trial, the evidence against James was undeniable. Surveillance footage, witness testimony, and forensic analysis painted a damning picture of a man who refused to let go. The prosecution argued that his actions were premeditated, fueled by jealousy and a need for control. In court, James's demeanor was unsettling. He showed little emotion as graphic photos of the crime scene were displayed and Amanda's loved ones shared gut-wrenching impact statements. The judge's voice trembled with anger as he addressed James directly, condemning his actions as an affront to humanity.
The evidence presented in this case established that both of these murders were committed in a cold, calculated, and premeditated manner.
It took the jury just a few hours to deliver their verdict, guilty of 2 counts of first-degree murder. The judge sentenced James to death, citing the heinous nature of his crimes. In the courtroom, Amanda and Lindsay's families clutched each other as the sentence was read. Tears flowed freely as they spoke of the light these women had brought into their lives, light extinguished by James's unrelenting rage.
My wife Lindy and her friend Amanda were shot and killed in Amanda's home, and they were still searching for the defendant who fled the scene.
James, however, remained stone-faced. No apologies, no visible regret. His chilling lack of remorse made the already heartbreaking proceedings even harder to bear. The horrors James Terry Colley Jr. unleashed that day left scars that will never heal. Next up, we have the chilling case of Quentin Smith, a case that delves into betrayal, deception, and a twisted tale of revenge.
That moment that he's formed the purpose to kill those 2 officers because he's not going back to jail.
In Columbus, Ohio, on February 10th, 2018, officers Eric Joring and Anthony Tony Morelli responded to a domestic violence incident in Westerville. A woman had called 911 asking for help before hanging up. The woman, who was called Candace, who was married to a man named Quentin Smith. When the officers got to the scene of the incident, it was discovered that Quentin Smith had punched and choked his wife. He had accused her of cheating on him before choking her until she lost consciousness. When she woke up, she called 911 crying, but didn't say anything because she was scared her husband would hear her talking to the authorities. When the police officers got there, Smith became enraged that Candace had called the police and taken the guns he had put in the couch, and this caused a tussle between the 3 men. Smith shot Joring and Morelli when they got there. He shot Morelli once in the chest, which went through his heart and lungs, before shooting Joring 3 times in his arms and head. Joring died immediately, and Morelli died later that day in the hospital. Smith was also shot 5 times, but he survived. Quentin was charged in court with 2 counts of aggravated murder and possession of a gun. Quentin was prohibited from having a gun at the time he shot and killed the officers. Due to the nature of the incident, Quentin's murder trial lasted 2 years. This case also garnered much public attention and sparked outrage from people across the country. Both former President Donald Trump and Governor John Kasich commented on the brutal way Quentin murdered these men. During the trial, one of the witnesses and a fellow police officer, Timothy Ray, looked visibly distraught and was struggling not to break down.
As I was going past the first department, another shot went off.
Another police officer who was a witness at the crime scene, Stacy Pentecost, could not control her tears as she gave her testimony to the court.
Officer Morelli was laying on the floor, holding himself up by his elbow.
It was an emotional time for many of the people present in court. The families of Morelli and Joring were also allowed to give victim impact statements. This case became the first one where the families of the victim were allowed to give impact statements during the trial of a capital offense. The prosecutor and the defending lawyer fought hard in court to lay their cases and arguments before the judge and the jury. It all came down to those 2 parties because they were the only ones who could control the outcome of the case.
We, the jury, being deadlocked and unable to agree on whether the aggravating circumstances outweigh the mitigating factors beyond a reasonable doubt, hereby unanimously return the following life sentence on count 1.
Quentin showed no emotion whatsoever as the jury read his sentence to him. Even though he was eligible for the death penalty, he was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. Regardless of the punishment, this put an end to a 2-year-long trial. The victims were honored with highways dedicated to their memory. If you're enraged by Quentin Smith's complete lack of remorse or emotion, just wait till you see how Dante Morris reacts to his sentencing.
That's count 1 for the first-degree premeditated murder of David Curtis. The court imposes a sentence of death.
Dante Morris has been regarded as the Tampa Bay killer for more than 13 years now. Morris murdered 5 to 7 people between May 18th and June 29, 2010 in Tampa, Florida. Morris had killed 21-year-old Derek Anderson, 25-year-old Harold Wright, and 42-year-old Rodney Jones due to substance trades gone wrong. He killed these men between May 18th and June 8th. As such, Morris became a wanted man by the Tampa Police Department for the murder of these men. Barely 20 days after he killed these men, police officers Jeffrey Kokab and David Curtis spotted Morris and attempted to arrest him because the car he was in had missing license plates. He had been a passenger in a car driven by his girlfriend, Courtney Brantley, when they were stopped by the officers in East Tampa. When Officer Curtis tried to run checks on the car, he discovered that Morris was already wanted for check fraud in Jacksonville. When Curtis discovered this, he called Kokab for assistance. Unfortunately, when the officers told Morris to put his hands behind his back, he responded by shooting the officers in the head with a concealed weapon before running away from the crime scene on foot. A witness immediately called the police and a large group of them started searching for Morris. The murder had been recorded on the dash cam of the patrol car Curtis drove, and it was from there that they identified Morris. They also identified Morris's girlfriend who fled the scene, leaving the car before hiding in an apartment. Due to the gravity of this case and how it was the worst thing that had happened to the Tampa Police Department, a large-scale manhunt was organized to search for Morris. The search for him became the biggest manhunt to happen in Tampa's history. 1,000 officers from 22 agencies were deployed to search for him. Other agents included SWAT teams, armored vehicles, dog teams, and helicopters with thermal imagers, as well as ATF officials were dispatched to look for Morris. They ended up searching about 300 homes during the manhunt. A reward for clues leading to his arrest was increased to $100,000, and on July 2nd, 2010, Dante Morris was arrested at a law firm in Tampa before he was taken to an isolated cell. This case garnered huge media attention after the manhunt was broadcast. Morris was charged to court for a host of offenses. He was charged with 4 counts of aggravated murder, resistance to arrest, attempted armed robbery, escape, car theft, drug possession, and dangerous bodily harm. It was later revealed that he had killed 2 more African American people in Tampa before the officers. He was first tried in July 2012 for the murder of 42-year-old Rodney Jones, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. In November 2013, he was eventually tried for the murder of officers Kokab and Curtis. Convicting him took only 4 hours because there was proof of the murder from the dashcam. During the trial, the wife of Jeffrey Kokab, Sarah Kokab, gave a victim impact statement, and she talked about how Morris took her husband from her. It made it worse for her because Jeffrey and Sarah were expecting a baby. A month after Morris murdered the officers, their daughter was stillborn, and this made Sarah's voice shake as she talked.
I just can't, I can't fathom him being.
Dante Morris's aunt was also put on the stand, and she wept uncontrollably as she said she believed that Morris was guilty of these crimes.
As to count 2 for the first-degree premeditated murder of Jeffrey Kokab, the court imposes a sentence of death.
The jury convicted him of double murder, and in May 2014, he was sentenced to death. Morris showed no reaction as the jury read his sentence. He received 2 more death penalties between 2014 and 2015, when he was transferred to death row by Judge William Funty. At least Dante Morris didn't ambush and kill cops brutally and painfully like this scumbag.
According to the prosecution, these were executions. Both victims were shot multiple times, but Elliot Knox claims he had nothing to do with the shootings.
On December 16, 2021, 2 people were murdered within hours of each other in Baltimore before the day ended. The first victim was police officer Keona Hawley, who had been an active member of the Baltimore Police Department. The second was a 27-year-old Justin Johnson. Both victims were shot and killed in what was called an ambush murder. The perpetrator? Elliot Knox and Trayvon Shaw. The most baffling part of this case was that it seemed that there was no motive for the murders these 2 committed. On the day of the tragic murders, Keona Hawley had been sitting in her patrol car in Curtis Bay when she was shot multiple times from different angles. Barely 90 minutes later, the men drove to Yale Heights and shot Johnson 6 times in the back while he was also sitting in his car. Hawley was immediately placed on life support due to the severity of her injuries, but unfortunately, she died 8 days later on the 23rd of December. The search for a suspect began, and eventually, security camera surveillance, cell phone, and DNA evidence put both Knox and Shaw at the scene of both shootings. Later, during the investigation, 2 guns were found in the house, one of which was used to kill both Hawley and Johnson. Knox was arrested shortly after and was charged to court on 2 counts of first-degree murder and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit murder. It was later revealed by the prosecution that the motive behind Johnson's murder was that he had been owing Shaw $100. A shocking testimony was made by Knox, which gave the impression of a motive. Knox told the court and the family of the victim that Shaw claimed that Hawley was a member of the Black Gorilla family, an infamous gang, and that the gang wanted her out of the picture. According to Knox, Hawley and more than 100 Baltimore police officers had formed an illegal alliance with the BGF, and they would often give the BGF names and identities of substance dealers around Baltimore for them to rob. He also claimed that officers would take substances and weapons from dealers to use as props so that the Baltimore Mayor's Safe Streets program would look more effective and relative. However, the sister of Keona Hawley, LaWanda Sykes, said that this was a lie and that there was no way Hawley was a gang member. These wild allegations were also disregarded by the jury because they felt it was defamation. Evidence also showed that Elliot must have been the closest to Hawley's patrol car when he and Shaw murdered her. The father of Knox's second victim, Harold Johnson, said, "I wish there was another way of penalizing these guys because Justin and Officer Hawley are gone. And the thing is, the taxpayer has got to foot the bill for these guys for the rest of their lives, and I wish that there was another way we could penalize them." 27-year-old Justin Johnson was a father of 5 children before he was murdered by Knox. The prosecutor was reported to have said the following after the sentencing of Knox. Attorney Ivan Bates said, "Today's sentencing of Elliot Knox conveys an unequivocal message that acts of violence, which have afflicted our communities, will not be tolerated. This sentence ensures that Mr. Knox will never be able to harm anyone in Baltimore again." At another trial, the prosecution told the jury that the 2 men had targeted Hawley and executed her. According to him, they knew who and where she was, so they murdered her while she was working.
Factor, and one of the biggest things that we want to know is the why this happened. I will not rest. I will not be satisfied until I know who, and why this was done to my sister.
In March 2024, Knox was sentenced to 2 consecutive life sentences for the murder of the 2 victims. His emotions were said to have ranged from defiance to accusatory. He reportedly kept trying to avoid taking the blame and kept trying to justify his actions. He told the court, with the help of his lawyer, that he had only been an accessory because Shaw had told him to hide the guns. This didn't stop the jury from sentencing him to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Well, after we killed this police officer, let's go across town to take someone's son. No one wakes up in the morning and thinks those things. Someone sent them to do it.
After the sentencing, the sister of Officer Hawley said they still needed to know the reason behind her sister's murder. She insisted that she would not rest until she knew who ordered her death and why. Elliot Knox's involvement in a brutal crime unveiled a shocking disregard for life. But the next case takes us to another act of calculated cruelty.
This especially was because so much of his defense tactic was predicated on intent, trying to show that Vickers, due to the chaos of the area, did not intentionally shoot officers. Mazurkowitz and Sang, or Adam, as you said, should or should not have known.
On July 21st, 2022, the Rochester Police Department was involved in a shootout with supposed gang members. The reason for this shootout was because they were looking for the man who had caused the death of 2 men barely 48 hours ago. The 2 men who finally caught this man would be harmed as well, one of them fatally. The perpetrator of all these murders? Kelvin Vickers. 21-year-old Kelvin Vickers was on the run after shooting and killing 25-year-old Migel Rand and 19-year-old Ricky Collins. They had been involved in a gang turf war, and Vickers and a member of his gang fatally shot these 2 men. It would later be revealed that neither of these 2 men was involved in the gang war and had been on their way to a musical event. As a result of this deadly shooting, police officers Anthony Mazurkowitz and Sino Sang were dispatched to the same street to watch out for the killer. The 2 of them had been in an unmarked vehicle as they were investigating. However, Vickers was waiting for any police officers to appear, and the moment he saw Anthony and Sino, he walked up to the back of their car, ambushed the 2 officers, and shot through the glass approximately 16 times. This shooting spree caused Sino Sang to get shot in the ankle, thigh, and shoulder. Anthony, on the other hand, was shot at least twice in his upper body, besides all the other areas the bullets pierced through. Anthony and Sang were rushed to the hospital, where Anthony later died at night. Vickers was eventually found an hour later, where he was hiding underneath a crawlspace, holding a loaded gun which police believed he was going to use to attack police officers again. Vickers was arrested and charged for the murder of the 2 earlier victims and the aggravated murder of Anthony Mazurkowitz, as well as the attempted murder of Sino Sang. The murder trial of Kelvin Vickers was long and his sentencing was delayed, but he could not escape justice forever. On February 29, 2024, it was finally time for Vickers to be sentenced. As per court procedures, the victims' family members were allowed to give impact statements.
He's just a number. Now you have no name. You know, you were Kelvin Vickers before, but now you're just a number.
The widow of Anthony told the court how brave her husband was and honored his memory before turning to Vickers and telling him how he was a sad excuse for a human being. She also requested that the judge give Vickers the maximum sentence without the possibility of parole. The mother of Vickers' first victim, Richard Collins, also gave an impact statement. All through the lengthy impact statements, Vickers was dry-eyed and showed no remorse whatsoever for his actions. Eventually, Vickers was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.
Vickers, due to the chaos of the area, did not intentionally shoot officers. Mazurkowitz and Sang, or Adam, as you said, should or should not have known.
As you just saw, Kelvin smirked, smiled, and didn't care about the emotions of his victims' families. Even when asked to speak at his sentencing or apologize for his actions, he declined and was led away. If you thought Kelvin Vickers' reactions during sentencing and trial were unrepentant, you're in for a huge shock when you witness how Markeith Lloyd took his trial and sentencing.
They done broke my nose, broke my jaw. They did all this shit till I resisted, but I crawled out to the to hide it. I resist. I ain't resist shit. They just did that shit. They tried to hide it from the news people, but I'm here right now.
Corrections, I think we've established everything we need to do in a first appearance hearing. He can be taken after he signs sign the no contact.
The case of Markeith Lloyd is surrounded by violence and a severe lack of responsibility. In Orlando, Florida, on December 13, 2016, Markeith shot and killed his girlfriend, Sade Dixon, while she was pregnant with their unborn child. While trying to defend her, Dixon's brother was also shot and injured by Markeith. After he saw what he had done, Markeith took off, and it took law enforcement about 2 weeks before they found him. Unfortunately, the woman who spotted him was alone, and once again, Markeith took the life of another person. On January 9, 2017, an Orlando police officer, Lieutenant Deborah Clayton, spotted Markeith leaving a Walmart store. Lieutenant Deborah tried to arrest Markeith, but he shot her and killed her. He shot her 4 times, and one of them was in the neck, causing the death of Lieutenant Clayton. The murder of Lieutenant Deborah caused a large-scale manhunt to be set up to find Markeith. There was also a bounty on his head, and a substantial sum was promised to whoever had information leading to his capture. 8 days later, on January 17, 2017, Markeith was finally arrested after he was found hiding in an abandoned house. When the police found him, he was accused of resisting arrest, and this caused the police officers who found him to use force. This resulted in Markeith getting a severely damaged eye and swollen face. Markeith was injured, and he was given medical treatment before he was taken into custody. What Markeith did sparked outrage because he not only murdered 2 adults, he murdered his unborn child. He was finally faced with charges. He was charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder for the murder of Sade Dixon and Deborah Clayton, attempted murder for shooting Ronald Stewart, Sade's brother, and aggravated murder with a firearm, among other charges. Because of the gravity of what Markeith had done, many people didn't want to defend him. As a result, he acted as his own defense attorney.
This how Donald Trump right now stuff off and steal. I'm not even really the defendant. I'm a flesh and blood person. That's a cooperation y'all done charged. That's a legal fiction.
The first time Markeith appeared in the courthouse after murdering his victims, he showed no remorse whatsoever and showed severe disrespect in the court.
They done broke my nose, broke my jaw. They did all this shit till I resisted, but I crawled out to the to hide it. I resist. I ain't resist shit. They just did that shit. They tried to hide it from the news people, but I'm here right now.
Corrections, I think we've established everything we need to do in a first appearance hearing. He can be taken after he signs the no contact.
Lloyd did not care that he was standing in front of a judge and proceeded to yell swear words at the judge. The police said the use of force was necessary in catching Markeith, especially since he was dangerous and kept resisting. This was the beginning of a long trial. During his trial, Lloyd's mental health was questioned, and a psychologist said he exhibited signs of schizophrenia and bipolar disorder. However, when he was asked, Lloyd said he didn't believe he was crazy and said he was only insane at the time of the murders and not overall insanity. Before his sentencing for the murder of Lieutenant Clayton in 2021, Markeith had already begun to serve the life sentence without the possibility of parole for the murder of Sade Dixon and her unborn child in 2019. So, in November 2021, by the unanimous recommendation of the jury, Markeith Lloyd was sentenced to death for the murder of Lieutenant Deborah Clayton. This was added to the sentence he was already serving for the murder of his ex-girlfriend.
The State of Florida versus Markeith Lloyd. Verdict, count 1. We, the jury, find as follows as to count 1 of the charge. The defendant is guilty of first-degree murder of a law enforcement officer.
Markeith, compared to the time he had first appeared in court after his crimes, kept completely quiet and stared blankly at the jury and the judge as his sentence was read to him. While Markeith Lloyd insisted that he wasn't crazy, the only reason Humberto Delgado Jr. was ever called a cop killer was because of his mental health.
But mostly, I want to speak to you. You. I will not speak your name. You are not worthy of such respect.
The case of Humberto Delgado Jr. is a strong reminder of why signs of mental illness should not be ignored and to avoid severe confrontation without enough information. In Tampa, Florida, in August 2009, Police Corporal Michael Roberts was shot and killed by Delgado. As it was later revealed, Roberts had seen Delgado push a shopping cart around in an area that was known for shopping cart thefts by homeless people. Delgado was homeless and had been pushing a shopping cart that was full of his belongings to a veterans hospital where he was hoping to find shelter. Delgado suffered from serious knee pain, and he walked 15 miles to the hospital where Roberts saw him in the area. Because that area was known for thefts and Delgado was homeless, Roberts stopped him and demanded identification. After Delgado showed Roberts his driver's license and a veteran identification card, Roberts began to search the shopping cart and demanded to see what was in the backpack that Delgado was carrying. Unknown to Roberts, the backpack that Delgado was carrying had 4 firearms stowed away in it. When Delgado became worried that they would be found, he tried to run. Michael quickly assessed the situation and tasered Delgado. Delgado resisted, and the two of them got into a fist fight. Not long after, Delgado shot and killed Roberts. He called and told his uncle that he had murdered a police officer and was going to kill himself as well. He asked for his uncle's forgiveness and hung up. However, he was found an hour later hiding in a woodpile and arrested. Delgado was charged, and the prosecutor told the court that he had committed premeditated aggravated murder. However, the defense attorney told the court that Delgado was plagued by mental illness and had a long history with mental illness. Quite sadly, it was later revealed that Delgado was a former police officer, and while he worked, he developed a sense of extreme paranoia and abnormal behavior. His paranoia eventually made him into what the defense attorney called a conspiracy theorist. He had been invited to join the Masons, but he turned down the invitation, claiming that they wanted to kill him. After this invitation, his paranoia got worse, and he left his job as a police officer altogether. Shortly after, he divorced his wife, left his home, and began wandering the streets, telling everyone who heard that 50 Cent was after him and trying to kill him. He would also force his children to comply with his delusions, and whenever they went anywhere, they had to lie down on the floor of the car because Delgado told his children they had special blood and people were looking for them. He made them lie down to prevent people from seeing them through the transparent glass. Delgado was hospitalized multiple times, and he was eventually diagnosed with bipolar I disorder with psychotic features. When he was tested, however, it was shown that Delgado was not under the influence of any drug or alcohol at the time he shot Roberts. During the trial, Delgado said he was sorry and claimed that he didn't mean to shoot Roberts, so this caused the prosecution to argue that Delgado was in a stable state when he killed Roberts. Eventually, the judge sentenced Delgado to death, and he was put on Florida death row.
For the murder of Corporal Michael Roberts, this court sentences you to be put to death in the manner prescribed by law.
You can see the video that Delgado showed no emotion as his sentence was being read and only cracked his neck. A few years ago, however, in 2015, the death penalty that was given to Delgado was overturned, and he was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole instead. It was said that no matter what had happened, Delgado could no longer be charged with aggravated murder because he did not have the capacity to obey the law because of his condition. It was eventually ruled that he could not be awarded the death penalty because it was an inappropriate sentence compared to other cases of aggravated murder. Next, we dive into the haunting case of Letitia Stotch, a mother's shocking actions that left the world in disbelief.
Without hesitation, that the facts in this case are the most horrific I have ever seen. Your conduct in this case deserves the maximum punishment that I can impose under Colorado law.
On January 27, 2020, Letitia Stotch called the El Paso County Sheriff's Office to report her stepson's disappearance. 11-year-old Gannon Stotch had been missing for a few hours when Letitia called and said she was worried. When officers arrived, she told them that Gannon had left the house to walk to see a friend, and when he didn't return, she called the police, based on the information that the press could get their hands on. Gannon was initially described as a juvenile runaway. However, after 3 days, the sheriff's office made it clear that he was a missing or endangered person. Because of this, a massive search party was organized and people started sending in as many tips as possible. Letitia Stotch got married to Gannon's father, Albert Stotch, in 2015, and promptly became Gannon's and his sister's stepmother. When Gannon went missing, she also provided as much information as possible to help find him. The search involved thousands of hours of investigation and had many federal agencies looking for Gannon as well. And the Colorado Police Department created a joint team to find him. Despite this, he was still nowhere to be seen. His parents hoped and prayed that their son would still be alive. Their hopes would be shattered on March 17, 2020. A maintenance worker in Pace, Florida found a strange-looking suitcase under the Escambia Bay Bridge. Inside the suitcase were the remains of Gannon Stotch. Authorities were alerted to the case and an autopsy was conducted. It was revealed later on that the cause of death was blunt force trauma, sharp force injuries, and a gunshot wound. The first suspect was Letitia because she was the only one who saw Gannon alive the day he went missing.
Gannon suffered 18 stab wounds to his body, his chest, his back, his head, and most importantly, his arms and his hands.
She claimed that Gannon had been sick and had to stay home from school, so she took him on her errands. This didn't align with the story that she told the police initially. With all of that, Letitia was arrested and charged with first-degree murder of a child by a person in a position of trust, child abuse resulting in death, tampering with a deceased human body, and tampering with human evidence. During the investigation, horrific details about Gannon's murder came to light. Letitia killed Gannon in his bedroom. She stabbed him 18 times, hit him hard in the head, and shot him with a handgun to make sure he was dead. Afterward, she shoved him in a suitcase and drove Gannon's body more than 1,300 miles away from home before dumping him.
Without hesitation, that the facts in this case are the most horrific I have ever seen.
She soon pleaded not guilty because of insanity, a claim that no one bought. She said that she had dissociative identity disorder because she had experienced sexual harm as a child. Despite this, she was judged fit to stand trial. 5 weeks after her murder trial started, she was found guilty of all charges. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus 156 years in prison. Where Letitia Stotch murdered her stepson, the same cannot be said for Neil Entwistle, who murdered his blood relatives for financial gain and lied about it. On January 22, 2006, people living in Hopkinton became concerned about their new neighbors. They had only been living in their home for around 10 days when people stopped seeing them around January 20th. The neighbors in question were Neil Entwistle, his wife, Rachel, and their 9-month-old baby, Lillian. On January 21st, Rachel's friend went to the police and told them that Rachel was missing. So the police went to the house and conducted a small search. There was nothing out of the ordinary, and they assumed no one was home. However, when they went back in the morning of January 22nd, they conducted a deeper search, and in the master bedroom were the bodies of Rachel and Lillian. They were found under a thick piece of bedding, and Entwistle was nowhere to be found. After autopsies were conducted, it was revealed that they had both died of gunshot wounds. At first, no one found the bullet in Rachel until the autopsy. Rachel had been shot in the head with a very small bullet, and Lillian had a bullet in the torso which passed through her and pierced Rachel's left breast. Information reached the police that Entwistle had bought a one-way ticket to London on the 21st of January and left Boston. This caused suspicion, as well as the fact that his DNA was found on the handgun that belonged to his father-in-law. Rachel's DNA was also on the gun's muzzle. Besides this, Entwistle's search history revealed that he had viewed a website describing how to kill people. One other peculiar thing was the fact that Entwistle had gotten $10,000 per month to an offshore account, even though he hadn't been employed for almost a year. He was also up to his neck in debt and under investigation for $30,000 in credit card fraud.
There was no reply. I thought maybe they were, I couldn't hear the shower, but I thought maybe in the bathroom or something, so I didn't.
Because of all these factors, he was declared a person of interest, and police called his parents' home in Worksop, England. During the call, Entwistle told police that he had been out of the house running errands when he came back to find his daughter and wife had been killed. He said that he covered up their bodies and did not call the police because he was so devastated. He then claimed that he decided to end his life with a knife but failed. He drove to his father-in-law's house because he knew he had a handgun. Upon getting there, the house was locked, so he flew to England. Despite this story, an international arrest warrant was issued. Entwistle was arrested at a train station when he was not found in his parents' house. He was then extradited and taken back to the U.S. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, the illegal possession of ammunition and the illegal possession of a firearm. He pleaded not guilty. While awaiting trial, Entwistle was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome after letters to his parents indicated that he may be contemplating suicide. 2 years after the murders, Entwistle was found guilty on all charges after his lawyer failed to get DNA evidence thrown out. Entwistle said nothing to defend himself or call witnesses to the stand. However, at some point he broke down in tears and was confused for laughter at some point. The jury ruled that whoever was paying $10,000 to his account every month had motivated him to murder his family. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on June 25, 2008.
Charging the defendant with murder in the first degree. What say you foreperson? Is the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty of murder in the first degree of Rachel Entwistle.
He appealed this conviction in 2013, but his appeals were rejected. He remains in jail till today. The chilling reactions of these psycho killers in court reveal just how twisted their minds truly are. Their cold indifference and unsettling responses will stay with you long after the verdict. But the journey doesn't end here. There's more to uncover. The next video on screen takes you even deeper into the world of shocking killers and their disturbing courtroom moments. You won't want to miss it.